Only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way.
Verse 8, David.
And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will consume with the breath of his mouth, and destroy with the brightness of his coming. The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders.
Right.
And with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this cause God shall send them a strong delusion, that they should believe a lie.
Just read one more, Brian.
That they all might be damned who believe not the truth, but have pleasure in unrighteousness.
Okay, as we go through this study, I want you to keep in mind those last two verses. And what Trey read in verse 4 is connected with the latter part of verse 3, where he says, let no one deceive you by any means. You guys spent a long time talking about deception last week, which is good. For that day will not come unless the falling away comes first. The man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition. So, we want to talk about who this man of sin is, the son of perdition. We may know, but we may not know. But regardless of knowing specifically who he had in mind, I think we have a pretty good idea of what it, who or what fits that mold. But regardless, you need to keep in mind the verse 10 through 12, because the bottom line is Paul points out to them that there are those who did not receive the love of the truth, that they might be saved. God said, for that reason I'll send a strong delusion that they'll believe a lie, that they all may be condemned who did not believe the truth but had pleasure in unrighteousness. Does verse 10, 11, and 12 come across like God doesn't care for people? Does it come across that way? What's your impression of those verses then towards those people? Does he want them saved? You guys know the answer to that one. He doesn't want anybody to perish. But when you read those verses, he's basically coming along and saying, look, if you don't want it, fine. I mean, that's it. He said, you want to believe a lie? I'll send a strong delusion. You believe a lie. Why would God allow a strong delusion to come for people to believe a lie? Because they don't want to receive the truth. The truth is there for people who want to believe it. As we all know, the psalmist says, the fool has said in his heart, there's no God. Come on, really? A fool says there's no God? Yeah, because there's an overwhelming evidence out there. But why did God allow an animal to exist that kind of can walk and has 5 fingers, and we might call them an ape, but why did God have something created that somehow could be linked to man? Why would God do that? There is no link. But if you want to believe that, fine. This is God's saying. The truth is there. I mean, who in their right mind wants to claim them as their ancestors? Was that your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather? No, that's not. But man wants to believe whatever they want. And what you learn here is, when people don't have a love for the truth, you guys know the answer to this. When people do not have a love for the truth, can you help them see the light? No. Can you help them?
No.
Why not?
Because they don't want to see it.
But even though they don't want it, can't you just make it so obvious that they can't help but receive it? Why not?
Jesus couldn't.
It just goes to show you how blind people get. Warren?
Well, I answer the question. I think I call it closed-minded. Closed-minded. It's regardless of anything that you can say or do, or anybody can.
Right.
Their mind is shut to that avenue. They're not going to go there.
Okay. And not only are they not going to go there, but when you have a person like that, not only is their mind shut, what is their perception of people like you and me when we're trying to present them that truth? What is their perception of us?
That we're wrong.
We're wrong.
Inferior,
right? We're not smart. Mal?
Gullible.
You're just believing what other people want you to believe. You believe that's because your parents believe it. You just believe because the church there believes it. And they're telling you you're not the thinkers. And so obviously it doesn't matter. You have the master teacher walking on the face of this. You have Paul, who is an apostle. As he mentioned, when I was with you, I told you these things. I reminded you of these things. They don't have so much power while I'm still here. And that's going to have a bearing on identifying who we're talking about here. But it's actually going to become more influential within the church and the world as a whole when the apostles are gone. Doesn't mean people could not have learned the truth, but they're still the minority. So let's back up. So let's talk about this. There's going to come a falling away first. The man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition. That day, again, it's come up. You talked about it last week. In the first epistle and the second epistle, he keeps talking about that day. What day? What day? Judgment Day. Okay? The second coming of Jesus Christ. They had a misunderstanding about it with the loved ones that have gone on in chapter 4 of the previous chapter. Oh, they're going to miss heaven because they weren't alive when Jesus came back. No, they're going to be fine. You're okay with that. When the Lord comes back, here's what's going to happen. And people are telling you lies about this. We talked about that when I was teaching 2 weeks ago. That of course the Lord hasn't come back yet because we're still here. So I mean, think this through. Now let's talk a little bit about this man of sin, the son of perdition. Verse 4. He opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Who's that fit? Possibly. Now it's still 600 years away from this time period, approximately, probably about 550 years. Talking the first pope is probably about 606, right? And so anything else might fit? Dave?
Anyone else who would be covetous about putting something else before God?
Yeah, of course, we're actually talking about religious people here, right? A lot of the Roman rulers wanted to be addressed as a god, by the way. And they wanted that. And remember, the influence that the Christianity had over time on Rome came when one of the Roman rulers, was it Christian? I'm trying to remember his name. Had received Christianity. But remember, when you're in power and you are introduced to Christianity, then all of a sudden things become gray. And you got the Roman rulers and the Roman government, and then you've got religion there, and there's an overlap, there's a mix of the two, and then all of a sudden you have this concept, because what do you need in government? What do you need in government? Well, you should have in government for it to work. What do you need in government?
Support leadership.
You need leadership. What else do you need? What? If we need what do we need in government today? Do we need every one of us ruling and reigning? Is that what's going to be effective here? No.
Followers.
What do you need? What?
Followers.
You need followers, but you need, again, we've been introducing this concept of, you need this hierarchy concept, right? You need that, ultimate leader, but then you have sub-leaders, and, we could talk about different religions that have that, right? They have, like, the main guy, and underneath that you have the subordinates to them, and then you have the subordinates to them. Now, you can talk about religious groups that have that. Somebody mentioned earlier about if you have the Pope, what do you have underneath them? 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 The layman. Okay, the layman. And so, you have this system that's in place. Now, within Rome, when he's talking about, here's Paul, he's incarcerated, he was with the brethren, he knows what's going on, and he knows what's going to happen. Of course, he's writing by inspiration. But he's talking about, he's wanting the brethren. We just have to be mindful of this. Without even knowing all the specifics, he's telling the local church there, you need to be mindful of those who will exalt themselves. Okay? Do you know anybody in the religious realm that exalts themselves? Well, of course we do, on a lot of levels in religious groups. Okay? And do you know religious groups that feels like they can make their own laws? Well, of course, they do that all the time. So just be mindful of what Paul is wanting them to understand. He says in verse 5, do you not remember that when I was still with you, I told you these things? For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. When something's already at work, what does that tell you? This is very important. It's kind of a subtle thought. It's already at work. What he's talking about here is that if you eventually get to this point, you have this gradual progression. And Paul's saying, you know, it's already happening. It's already at work. It's unfolding, Mallory.
Couldn't part of it be happening because in the old law, or in the Old Testament, you know, Moses was commanded to put people over groups of people. So it's not even like it was a new concept in the New Testament. It was something that they had been doing, you know, the Jews had been doing since the law was given back in the Old Testament. You know, it was advised to Moses that he can't, you know, handle everything, so to put people over it. So, you know, could part of it have been just that influence because, hey, we've always had, you know,
Right.
small leaders over us, and this is a new law, so it's a new way of handling it. So they had to get, you know,
Yeah.
break that whole.
Right. And you know, is this a bad thing? Is leadership a bad thing? No. And there's a lot of that being taught when Paul would write epistles. You know, submit to those who are over you. Okay, it's one thing, you know, he's talking about leadership, he's talking about those that are over you, but at the same token, he's talking about here, you need to be careful of those who will exalt themselves above that which is called God, or that is worship, sits as God in the temple, showing himself that he is God. Do you not remember that when I was with you, I told this again, verse 6, and now you know what is restraining, that he may be revealed in his own time, and it's going to happen. But it's already started. And I got to tell you, the problem was there when Jesus came on the scene. Right? Scribes and the Pharisees. It's nothing new. Right? Now, getting back to Mallory's point, did the scribes and the Pharisees kind of get that mindset because of what they were familiar with in the Old Testament? You know, whatever. But maybe. But the point was, their heart wasn't right. That's what he's talking about here. They were not interested in truth. They were interested in their position. Can that happen to a preacher standing right here today? Absolutely. You know, if you're more interested in your position and who you are rather than the truth, you need to be aware of it. I need to be aware of the dangers that are there. This is a gradual thing, is the point. And so this is a great lesson for us. That's why we're spending a lot of time in this chapter. This is a great lesson for us, that for the River Ridge Church of Christ to drift off into apostasy, if that ever happens, we should be able to look back and say, yeah, we saw signs of it back here. Remember back there when this was going on and we didn't say anything? You know, we might be over here now and go, man. And see, I always thought that religious groups, our brethren that have gone beyond, I always personally felt, and I was wrong on this, I felt, man, when the Boston movement, when the cult, when the Church of our Lord got caught up in a cult, when it went that far, my thinking was, it's going to open up their eyes and they're going to come back to the way it's supposed to be, because they saw once you opened the door, it opened the floodgate. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. You know what they did? They went back and they said, well, that's wrong, but we were comfortable here. So this is why you and I stay on guard and say, you know what, we don't want to be comfortable with anything that's wrong. Once you do that, it doesn't take long. And that's what Paul's talking about here. It's starting, brethren. It's coming. It hasn't happened yet. this gradual process. Jane?
In verse 2, that's very interesting there when he says, nor by letter as from us. In other words, at that time, evidently, people were writing and not agreeing with what Paul and the apostles were saying. So what is the difference in today? When somebody gets up in the pulpit and with the Bible, at least in front of him, tells you this and that, he's telling them the wrong thing.
Right. When they put their words on par with this, you know, that's okay, but listen to me too. And that's what they said. And this is where we cry consistency, because you can't have both. And that's why less and less of the Bible was being taught. And so, I mean, I think that the moment Jesus started teaching, go to the Sermon on the Mount. The moment Jesus started teaching and introducing about the kingdom that's to come, and then get into Acts chapter 2, the moment that, you know, you got the church in its infancy, and and the word was being spread, right from the infancy, Satan is at work.
Warren mentioned the time that we close our mind. In other words, we've been a Christian for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. When we close that mind and are not willing to change if we find out that we're wrong,
Right.
then that's the problem with individuals.
And the flip side of that is, and if you are strong and you stop studying and you stop checking things out, you let your guard down. Now look what he does here. He goes in verse 7, for the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way. Okay? You know, and one of the things about this is, when you talk about apostasy, it waits. It waits. It's almost like, I don't want this to come across negative. I want this to be kind of positive. But it's like if a person goes into a congregation, okay, I won't talk about us. A person goes into a congregation and he's got ulterior motives and he knows what he wants with this congregation as far as error is concerned. He's got a plan. But he sees a couple of families or those who are really strong and he's just biding his time. Maybe they'll move away. Maybe they'll perish. Maybe I can plant some seeds of doubt into them. But you know, you've got, and people know this. I have witnessed it. I have seen it in congregations where brethren, you know, I've talked with preachers, and he's working with a local group, and there's two people that just always seem to be just, they're you know, he's teaching the class, and their comments are trying to pull the congregation this way. And he would teach to bring them, keep them online, but those were always there, always there, always there. And over time, those two people, their true colors surfaced because their agenda and not getting what they really were wanting. You know, they're trying to bide their time. That's why we got to stay the course. Sometimes it drives them away. Sometimes they stay and they still want to be a thorn in the flesh. But we as a church need to be aware of the subtle influences that are there, how that people are just waiting in the dark. Have you ever been around brethren and you're going, man, they just really seem to sow discord. Every time you talk with them, it's the negative, it's the bad. Because they know what's best. And you got to be careful and be alert to these things. And this is exactly what this chapter is all about. Gene.
And what happens is, if somebody comes in with that attitude, they're not going to have much conversation with you.
No.
Or they're going to pick out the weakness in the congregation, and they're going to work on that.
Yeah, I've seen it. Once they can get some sympathy from somebody, okay, get them in their corner, then they just gravitate to that. I've seen it in a lot of places where if you get somebody come in who's really worldly, you know, they're quote a Christian, but they're worldly, who do they gravitate to? They want to find people who are worldly like them. It's like when I've heard people talk about when they go to some of these colleges, you know, and there's Christians down there. You know, there's Christians down there who love to read their Bible and they love to study. I don't like to do that. I'm not gravitating to them. I'm going to gravitate to the partiers. I'm going to gravitate to those who are a little, anti-establishment, who think differently, who want to do things their own way. That's the danger that is there. The lesson for us, be alert. Be on guard. Know things. I know what they're up to. And it doesn't take long for people to know that you cannot be played. Isn't that good? You cannot be played. I think a good mark for you with your friendships with people is that you have the ability to, even your closest friend, that you could say in a discussion you're having, well, I disagree with that. You're not a yes man. Even when you're sitting in somebody's home and you're just discussing things, and they say something, well, it's our friendship, I don't want to say anything right now. No. Some of our closest friends will be sitting around the table talking about something, and the comments made, I'll go, well, I disagree with that, and here's why. You should be able to do that, or at least to discuss it, and not just be a blind follower. Now, in verse 8, and then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will consume with the breath of his mouth and destroy with the brightness of his coming. Okay, so when is this son of perdition, when is this guy going to be removed? When's it going to stop?
Judgment.
Okay. Can we stop it? Can we stop it? Only Jesus says. Now, we could prevent it from him influencing you. I get that. But the point is, and we could do the best we can to stop it from here, right? But you can't stop you can't stop the tide. You can't stop the false teaching that's going on. You just can't. Jesus couldn't. Jesus couldn't stop it when he walked on the face of this earth. Think about why he was killed. I know why he died, to save us from our sins. But when you think about why he was killed, I've mentioned time and time again, one of the biggest reasons he was killed is because he opened up his mouth and people didn't want to hear what he had to say. And that's the bottom line. And so there's a comfort for us of knowing this kind of thing that's going on. The day of reckoning's coming. I don't know when that is. But they will be held accountable for what they're doing. And although Paul is saying on that day it'll be taken care of, how does that help the brethren at Thessalonica? Does it warn them about it? What does it teach? How does that help them be told this? Think about these words. How does it help the brethren there?
Well, it gives them the awareness that it's taking place right now.
Okay.
That they need to keep their guard up and they need to be prepared with a defense to.
Because if they don't, what? What if they don't, James?
Well, then they could succumb to that free thinking or that false teaching.
And what happens in the end?
Well, death. If they succumb.
Yeah, their fate is your fate then. If you're telling them, boy, I tell you, when the Lord comes back, those who've been acting this way, they're going to meet their Maker and they'll be, held accountable for it. Guess what? You follow that pursuit, so will you too. I think it's a fallacy in a lot of religious groups, and that's why I'm glad we aired these thoughts, and if people are studying, we want them to know that doing what a church tells you to do doesn't excuse you from accountability. Because if a church tells you to do something that's wrong, and you do it, you're just as wrong. I've told you this, I know there's probably two that haven't heard it, but most of you have, where I told you I studied with the guy who said, if I do what the church tells me to do and it's wrong, they'll be accountable, but God will accept me because I did what I was told. If we learn anything from this chapter, it's the only thing you do that you're told needs to become from the Lord. That's it, not from man.
That's what happens. If I have the attitude that I'm going to come to River Bridge and be told what to do, and you or anybody else,
right,
and do it, I may not go to heaven in the end, because I'm responsible for Gene McNabb.
Exactly. That's it. Now that doesn't mean we don't have leadership and we're not to be submissive to elders if we have them. We're not to be united. I mean, of course we're going to be united. You know, you have preachers. You know, Timothy was told to preach that word. You know, listen to it. But yeah, search the scriptures. Check out those things whether they're so or not. And you guys talked about that last Sunday morning, talking about the Bereans. That's how you opened up your class. More noble than those in Thessalonica. And that they searched the scriptures. And this is what Paul is trying to get them to understand, that lawless one. But however, when he says this, be taken out of the way, with the brightness of the Lord's coming, verse 9, the coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan with all power, signs, and lying wonders. Wow. Look at that. How in the world do you guard against anybody, any body, you know, body of people, or anyone? How do you guard against it if they have all power, signs, and lying wonders?
Scripture.
Scripture. Test it. Okay. There are things that people do. Well, let me put it this way. Are there things that have happened by religious leaders today that you cannot explain? Or religious people that you cannot explain? Yeah. There's some things that go on I can't explain it. Okay. But I still go to the Word. Say, Chuck, how do you explain somebody sitting in there in an audience, starts to shake, and then rolls around on the floor, and claims the Holy Spirit has come upon them? He says, how do you explain that without being sarcastic and belittling? How do you explain that? Again, now I could guess how people can get worked up into a frenzy. I happen to know that some of the cults will have music playing for hours before they get things going. They're trying to work up an audience. That's what happens. I mean, people can be played. You know that I've witnessed it where people who wouldn't ordinarily be violent become violent because they get caught up in like a riot, let's say. They're getting caught up in the moment. There are a lot of explanations why it could happen, but even if you don't, as James mentioned, with lying wonders and signs, people are saying, well, Chuck, how do you explain that this person over here and, they claim to speak in tongues and I witnessed it. I go, but look, that person doesn't even teach the plan of salvation. So you think God is working through this person who's telling people all you have to do is believe and you be saved? You see, this is what you need to rest on. You need to rest on truth. You're going to encounter things where you'll say, I don't even understand how that happened. Or a religious person who tells me, true story, religious person who tells me, Chuck, I answered the phone and I almost didn't get to the phone. And if I didn't get to the phone, I wouldn't have adopted that son. That's what the person told me. I said, how do you explain these coincidences that happen? And I hear a lot of them in the religious realm. How do you I can't explain it. But I'm not going to toss aside what I do know to be the truth. You can't toss that aside for whatever. Somebody who's walking down the street and hears a little voice, and there was some baby caught in a culvert, and from one of the floods, and you'll hear a miraculous story happen. And a person talks about, God led me to that person, and I saved that person. And, well, where do you go? Well, I go where they teach this. And you go, well, they teach false doctrine there. So am I supposed to let down my guard because if something happened, I can't explain it. It almost seems like God had his hand in it all. And so I'm just going to take this and just throw it aside. That's what happens, Dan.
I mean, a lot of these things that get presented to us, it looks like chance, right? Just as we can't explain how it happened, a lot of times someone is attributing it to God, but they can't definitively also prove that that was the only way it could have happened was through his hand. A lot of what is described in the Bible is the opposite of that. It was supposed to be reproducible. It was supposed to be something that could be called up when needed or on demand.
Right.
So if we look at there's religious groups that claim the ability to still do miracles and things like that today. Mormons being one of those. They claim to have, people in the position of apostleship today who can still conduct miracles when they need to and things like that. But if you look at the record there, anytime someone outside that group has challenged them on it or, asked them to validate that claim, they always refuse to do so. And they'll cite scripture to do it, but they are incorrectly citing it. Jesus would refuse to conduct miracles after he had already done one for a group. Saying that, they just want to keep seeing that same confirmation. Mormon, I'm using the term in quotes, Mormon apostles today, they will refuse to do it the first time, saying that we should just take them at their word, not that they don't actually have to do that confirmation. That would be that's relevant to what we're reading here today, here in 2 Thessalonians. That's the kind of false signs, attributing to something that can't be proven and refusing to do something that's reproducible.
Unrighteous deception. A religious group they're sitting here praying, and there's this tornado coming, and it hits all these homes, and it bounced over their house and hit all these homes. What are they going to tell you? We got the truth. No, they got the truth. Why? Why do they got the truth? Well, because it passed over us. Well, what about all these people who were in these homes? So you're saying they're all lost, right? Is that what you're saying? They're all lost? Of course, Jesus had to deal with that. He had to tell his followers the Tower of Siloam, where those 18 people were killed by the tower that blew over on them. And are they worse sinners than anybody else? Well, they must. Well, it's coincidence. There are things that happen that way. But then you have a faithful church of I know they're in the basement and a tornado comes through and wipes out their building. The point is, unrighteous deception. You have to ask yourself, what convinces you something is truthful? I'm going to tell you that. What convinces you something's truthful? Charismatic speaker. Guy who tells, stories that just make me cry. Just what convinces you something is truthful? And he talks about the danger here, the coming of the lawless one and lawless, okay? That's where Dan's coming. Lawless, all right? The lawless one is according to working of Satan with all power, signs, and lying wonders. But I'm going to tell you, for the person who doesn't see this, they look at these people, oh, no, those are not lying wonders. That person's dynamic, with signs and powers. That's from God. That's his stamp of approval. Look at verse 10. And with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, that they might be saved. Bottom line, goal for you and I is that we want to be saved. So therefore we have the love of the truth. We keep it simple. Why do you do that? Why doesn't your church do that? Why do you just follow that? Why do you keep doing this? There's a bottom line to all this. There's a common denominator to all those questions. Why do you do that? Why do you do that? Why don't you do this? Why do you do that? I want to be saved. I want to be saved. I just want to go to heaven. This is the bottom line. Gene?
The Word of God is instructions as to how we should live our lives.
Right.
There's a lot of things about man, why parents do this, why this man goes down and drinks and the kids don't have anything to eat. I don't understand that. So, it's just the way it is.
I'm going to tell you, all this discussion we're having, you could have two different people be listening or viewing and say, wow, that's really a positive lesson. Oh man, that's a real negative lesson. It depends. When we talk about the idea, well, I want to be saved. Well, but that means, Chuck, you can't do this and you can't do that and you can't do that. That's like telling kids, we're going to take you to Disney next week, but I don't want you hitting your sister, and I want you to brush your teeth, and I want you to make your bed, and I want you to clean up your toys. They're all excited, but if you just focus on, yeah, but why is there joy? Because you got to do all this stuff, and you can't do this, and you can't. Yeah, but I'm going to Disney. I'm going to be saved. There is joy, and I don't want to get caught up in the deceptions out there. I don't want to get caught up in any of this stuff. Why? Because I'm going to heaven. I'm positive about that. It doesn't bother me. I'm not missing out on anything. I know they're trying to convince me, Chuck, you're missing out on all the fun by not doing all this stuff. Are you kidding me? I've got a hope of heaven. And there's nothing greater than that. So when we discuss and study here the things we're supposed to do and the things we're not supposed to do, that helps us because we got a goal. Dave?
There's a good point here in Deuteronomy that reflects that. It says in chapter 13, if there arises among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, and he gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or the wonder comes to pass, of which he spoke to you, saying, let us go after other gods, which you have not known, and let us serve them. You shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul. You shall walk after the Lord your God and fear him and keep his commandments and obey his voice. You shall serve him and hold him fast.
The passage there relates to 1 John 4 verse 1. Test the spirits to see whether they are of God or not, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. When he talks about the working of Satan with power, signs, and lying wonders, he's not talking about things that you cannot test. Nothing you can do about it. You just, no. God doesn't put us in a situation where you are that vulnerable. In the first century, they performed spiritual gifts to confirm the Word. We don't need the Word confirmed anymore. Verse 11 says, and for this reason God will send them a strong delusion, that they should believe a lie. Keep in mind, God doesn't make anybody believe a lie. That's free will, folks. Free will either way. You got free will to obey, you have free will to disobey. It's your choice. It's always been that way from the beginning of time. What he said was that they all may be condemned who did not believe the truth but had pleasure in unrighteousness. Now we're getting to the heart of the matter here of why. Why are there so many people in these religious groups? Why are there so many religious groups? Answer? Why?
Anything goes.
True.
They wanted to do what seemed good to them.
Okay. Like that. Why are there so many different restaurants?
Taste different taste.
Right. Supply and demand. What do you got a hanker for in today? Mexican, Chinese, hamburger, whatever you got a hankering for, right? Whatever you desire, is there a religious group out there that can satisfy you with whatever desire you might have? Well, I mean whatever desire you may have. Is there a religious group that will satisfy that? Can you find it? Sure can. I don't care what it is that you want to do in this world. I mean, even corruptly. I mean, they're out there. If you want to find a church that worships the God of love and will approve of any immoral act, but we'll call it a church, it's there. It's there. You want to go to a place, I know this is extremism, but if you want to go to a place where you can just attend and not wear anything, you go, seriously? Seriously. And anything that's out there, because the devil will say, look, if you don't want the love of the truth, just whatever pleasures you. What was Eve's problem? If you had to identify specifically Eve's problem, what comes to mind?
Desire.
What was that?
Desire.
That was it. She looked at it and she desired it. Did she get what she desired? She did. It was within her reach. She wanted it, she took it. Adam, what'd you do? You did what you wanted to do too. It was your choice. And so when he talks about here, that they, and notice that they all may be condemned. They all were condemned, or will be, those who have pleasure in that. And so we need to ask ourselves, where are we in all of this? Are we an independent thinker in the sense we're just not a blind follower? We'll challenge things. We'll think about that. I've been in many times I've preached sermons, people go, you know what, I got to go home and think about that a little bit. Okay, they'll go home, read those verses over, study them a little bit. Okay, that's fine. You're not insulting me. I got to think about that a little bit. Especially if we get into some meatier stuff, it's just hard to accept it right away. Especially if it's something you haven't heard before, and especially if you've got a visitor that comes in, that's all new to them. You don't want to jump all over people. And remember, when you're in Bible studies, your own personal Bible studies with people, folks, don't get frustrated and don't rush the Bible study. You plant the seed, you back off. Let it grow. Because, well, but urgency, time is urgent. I got to give them everything in our first Bible study. I mean, I just got to overload them. It's like taking one of these babies here. Taking Cooper back there and say, come on, man, you got to love a T-bone. Come on, eat steak. You're not ready for it. And we need to understand that when we're trying to teach people that it takes time, and we need to keep our guard up. So anyways, guys, I appreciate your thoughts. Powerful stuff that's just as applicable today. Because some of them are even reruns. Yeah, from 3 years ago.
We've got 4 on there.
Mary Ellen, we're trying to think of something easy so she'll get some.
Pretty recent.
You can cook that.
Chris is on 3rd shift, so she was going to come to our house today. She's like,
It's like a snowball. Yeah. I'm pretty sure. Three of the churches that I work full time with.
Yeah, it's gonna
Yeah, it's because I spend a lot of time.
You gotta hold it for about 6 seconds.
Monday night,